There used to be a beginner version of adulthood. Not a perfect life, not an easy life, and definitely not some golden age where everyone bought a house at 22, raised 4 kids on one income, and whistled happily on the way to the factory. That world never existed for everyone, and pretending it did would be dishonest. But for a lot of people, there was at least a first step. It might have been a small apartment, a cheap used car, a modest first home that needed work, or a job that did not make you rich but gave you enough to begin. Maybe your furniture came from your parents' basement. Maybe your kitchen table came from an aunt. The point was not that your life looked impressive. The point was that it had started. That was the starter life. It was not glamorous. It was often cramped, mismatched, secondhand, and a little ugly. The first apartment did not need to look like an Instagram post. The first car did not need heated seats, a touchscreen, or a monthly payment that followed you around like a second rent. The first job was not supposed to make you wealthy. The first home was not supposed to be your forever home. It was all supposed to be a beginning, a place to stand while you figured the rest out. And maybe this is what people are really talking about when they say life used to feel more possible. It is not always nostalgia. It is not always people pretending everything was better before. Sometimes what they are mourning is much simpler than that, the disappearance of the entry point. Because the starter life gave people something incredibly important. It gave them a way in, a way to leave home, a way to build savings slowly, a way to make mistakes without destroying the next 10 years of their finances, a way to become an adult before they could afford to look like one. That distinction matters because today a lot of people are not asking for luxury. They are not asking for mansions, sports cars, perfect kitchens, or some flawless life where nothing ever goes wrong. They are asking for the basic version, the imperfect version, the version where you can move out, pay your bills, maybe save a little, and slowly build from there. But more and more, even that feels out of reach. The bottom rung of the ladder did not just move higher. In some places, it feels like it was removed completely. And when that happens, the entire timeline of adulthood starts to change. If you cannot afford the starter apartment, you delay moving out. If the used car is too expensive, you delay independence. If the first home is unreachable, you delay ownership. If wages cover survival but not progress, you delay the future. Slowly, adulthood becomes less like something people enter and more like something they wait for. That is where a lot of the frustration comes from. It is not that people are lazy. It is not that they are soft. And it is not that their entire financial problem is coffee, avocado toast, or some subscription app that teaches them how to breathe. The deeper issue is that the economy has changed the price of beginning. The death of the starter life is not just about houses. It is not just about rent, used cars, groceries, or debt. It is about what happens when the first step in life starts costing as much as the dream used to. For previous generations, the starter life was often stressful and full of sacrifice, but at least it existed. You could begin badly. You could begin cheaply. You could begin with hand-me-down furniture, a noisy fridge, a car older than you wanted, and a job that was not impressive but paid enough to keep you moving. Today, even beginning badly can be expensive, and that changes the emotional texture of life. Because there is a difference between struggling after you start and struggling for years just to get permission to start. People do not only feel poorer, they feel blocked. They feel like the normal stages of life have been moved behind a paywall. The first apartment, the first car, the first home, the first real sense that your life belongs to you. All of it feels delayed, financed, rented, or just out of reach. That is where we are now. In an economy where millions of people are working, paying, trying, saving, failing, starting over, and still wondering why the first step feels so far away. Because the starter life did not disappear all at once. It was repriced slowly, month by month, bill by bill, rent increase by rent increase, until one day, the basic version of adulthood started looking like a luxury product. And that is where the story begins. The strange thing about the starter life is that it did not disappear in one dramatic moment. It happened slowly, one price at a time. The starter home got repriced. The used car got repriced. The first apartment got repriced. Education, healthcare, insurance, transport, food, all of it became harder to sustain. Somewhere along the way, the entry-level version of life started requiring a premium salary. You can see it most clearly in housing. Across OECD countries, real house prices have risen by more than 40% over the past decade. And even though wages have been recovering after the inflation shock, the OECD reported that in early 2025, real wages were still below their early 2021 levels in about half of the countries it tracks. The exact numbers change from country to country, but the direction is familiar almost everywhere. The cost of beginning moved faster than the income people were supposed to begin with. They feel it when a normal paycheck meets a housing market that no longer seems designed for normal paychecks. In the United States, the median sale price of a new house was still above $400,000 in the first quarter of 2026. And by 2025, first-time buyers had fallen to just 21% of home purchases, while the typical first-time buyer age had risen to 40. That does not mean every country has the exact same housing story, but it does show something important. In one of the richest countries in the world, the first step into ownership is happening later, or not happening at all. And housing is only the most obvious example. The cheap used car, which used to be one of the classic symbols of starting out, also became less reliable as an escape hatch. Even after cooling from the peak, used car prices jumped sharply after 2020, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks that jump in the used cars and trucks CPI. For a lot of people, the starter car stopped feeling like a starter purchase. It became another expensive gate between where you are and where you need to go. That is the part people feel every day. Not in a spreadsheet, but in the small humiliations of modern life. And the paycheck that looked decent for a moment has already been claimed by rent, fuel, food, insurance, debt, utilities, and all the other costs of being alive. And the frustrating part is that most of these things are not optional. You need somewhere to live. You need food. You may need transportation to get to work. You may need education, training, or certifications just to compete. You need healthcare. You need a phone and internet, because modern life quietly assumes you are always reachable, always connected, always able to log in, verify, apply, respond, upload, download, and pay. So when all of those basic things rise together, the problem is not just that life gets more expensive. The problem is that beginning gets more expensive. The point is not that life used to be easy. The point is that the first step used to be lower. You could start with less. Less income, less status, less furniture, less credit, less perfection. You could enter adulthood before you had everything figured out. Today, it often feels like you need to be financially established before you are even allowed to begin becoming financially established. That sounds ridiculous, but that is how a lot of people experience it. To rent an apartment, you may need proof that you already make several times the rent. To buy a home, you need savings that are hard to build while paying rent. To get a decent job, you may need education, experience, a car, a laptop, internet, and time you cannot afford. To avoid debt, you need enough income not to rely on debt in the first place. It becomes a loop. You need stability to build stability. You need money to save money. You need a start before anyone will give you a start. And this is where the old advice starts to break down. People still hear the same lines. Work hard, move out, get a better job, buy a small place, drive a cheap car, stop wasting money. And sometimes there is truth in that advice. Personal choices do matter. But advice becomes useless when it refuses to look at the price of the world people are actually living in. Because what happens when the cheap car is not cheap? What happens when the small place is still too expensive? What happens when the starter home was bought by an investor, priced like an asset, or simply never built in the places where people need to live? What happens when the better job requires credentials that put you into debt before you earn your first real paycheck? What happens when rent becomes the new permanent mortgage, except at the end of 30 years, you own nothing? That is the trap. For millions of people, the basics no longer feel like stepping stones. They feel like toll booths. You pay to live near opportunity. You pay to get to work. You pay to learn the skills. You pay to stay connected. You pay to stay healthy. You pay to participate. And after all that paying, there is often very little left to actually build with. That is why this problem feels so exhausting. It is not only the big dream that moved out of reach, it is the small beginning. The ability to say, I am not rich yet, but I am moving forward. That feeling has become harder to reach. And when people lose that feeling, they do not only lose money, they lose momentum. They lose the sense that sacrifice is leading somewhere. They lose the feeling that today's struggle is buying tomorrow's freedom. Because struggle is easier to carry when it feels like a bridge. It becomes much heavier when it feels like a treadmill. And that may be the defining difference between the old starter life and the new one. Before, struggle often came after you entered adulthood. You moved out, then struggled. You bought the cheap car, then struggled to maintain it. You got the starter home, then fixed it slowly. You began the life, and then fought to improve it. Now, for many people, the struggle comes before the beginning. The struggle is getting permission to start, and that changes everything. Because when the cost of beginning rises too high, people do not stop wanting adulthood. They just get stuck outside the door, working, waiting, planning, delaying, trying to do everything right, and still feeling like the first step keeps moving further away. That is what it means when the starter life gets repriced. And when the basic life requires luck, something has gone wrong. Because a society can survive luxury being expensive. It can survive mansions being expensive. It can survive sports cars, designer clothes, and 5-star vacations being expensive. But when the first step becomes expensive, when the ordinary beginning becomes expensive, when the basic path into adulthood becomes expensive, then the problem is no longer that people cannot afford the dream. The problem is that they cannot afford the door. And once the door becomes unaffordable, everything behind it starts to look impossible. This is the first half of the story. In the next video, we'll look at what happens when the starter life does not disappear completely, but gets converted into rent, debt, subscriptions, and monthly payments. And if you want to understand more of how we got here, I've made videos on inflation and the day money changed forever in 1971. I'm the Uneducated Economist. Thanks for watching.